Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I was actually struggling whether to how to introduce this message just now. So I shouldn't have given that away. It should have been just seamless and stuff. Hey, if you have a way that you always do something in your family, like there's a constant tradition in how you do the same thing, or even if you constantly do the same thing yourself, you have something that not a lot of other people have. This is actually really evident when, I teach kids. It's really evident when you see families interact and when you see kids interact with their families and things like that. If your family has something that is a tradition, and it can be just anything, something that you do that sets you apart in a certain way or helps you remember the passage of time, you are actually rare in the modern day. And that's what I kind of want to talk to you about today. So we're in Proverbs. We're in the second second chapter of Proverbs there. We're on Proverbs 2, starting in Proverbs 2, where it says, "My son." And honestly, when I was thinking about this message, I just went, there's so many ways that I could go this direction with the tradition that you have being the thing that you fall back on. But as I was reading stuff this week, I kind of stumbled on one of my favorite characters in history ever. And surprise, surprise, Geoff is teaching a history lesson. So today I want to talk to you about a dude named Winston Churchill. And just imagine that, it's the 1940s, around 1941, 1942, and I'm about 100 pounds more than I am currently, and I'm really old. And don't imagine a cigar or anything. It's probably not church acceptable. But anyway, so Winston Churchill gets on the radio about that time, and it's about when the Germans were performing the Blitz of London and of England, and they were just flying bombs over the entire area, just night after night after night. And Winston Churchill decides, rightfully so, I should get on the railroad. Wow, Barrett. I should get on the radio and I should talk to the people about what's happening. I mean, rightfully so. It's a great movie. I think it's just called Churchill, where he does this entire speech. You could probably find it on YouTube. It's actually said by a guy that actually looks like Winston Churchill, so it has a little bit of meaning. But basically, I haven't memorized this speech at all, but basically he says, where will we fight? Great Britain. We'll fight on the ramparts. We'll fight in the fields. We'll fight on the airfield. And he keeps going. And it's this big, long list of places that we're going to fall back on if the Germans invade us, right? And we will fight with it. We will not fail, is what he's trying to say. And at the very end, he says, we will never surrender. And in that movie, and I didn't know if this was historically accurate or not until after watching the movie and looking it up, but in that movie, the character actually turns away as soon as they go, okay, you're off air, and he turns away, and he says to his advisor closest to him, he says, we'll fight with broken bottles, because that's bloody all we've got. And he starts walking away in a way that only Winston Churchill could do, right? He starts walking away, lumbering away, and stuff. And when I was watching that movie, I went, that's crazy. He didn't say that at all, did he? And he did. He actually did. Whether he believed it or not, the people of Great Britain believed exactly what he had to say, took it to heart, and were able to resist the Nazis because of all of the things he outlined. He says, this is what it means to be a British person. But he wasn't the only country that did that in that time period. There was actually another small country you may not be aware of called Finland. And the people in Finland, instead, in the United States, we teach our kids to walk. The people in Finland teach their kids to ski first. That's a joke. That's really what happens. As soon as they're able to walk, they're given this little, baby skis, and they're put, outside and stuff, and you learn how to ski. Basically, before you can run, you are on a pair of skis. Not only that, but as soon as you're able to walk, you're outside. Now, we live in the Great Pacific Northwest that, doesn't get below 20 ever, and doesn't get above 85 ever. And they live in a location which, if you've been to or lived in, North Dakota, Minnesota, those kind of places, you're very aware of Arctic tundra location and the things that could happen because of that, right? Well, this is kind of always the case. Finland only has a summer and a winter, it's said. They don't really have a fall or spring. There's no transition, just kind of, it's warmer at one point, and then it descends into just Arctic temperatures the rest of the time. Well, Finland at this time had maybe, I think, about 6,000 troops is kind of all they had that were, their little army. It's basically like a peacekeeping force, kind of like the National Guard. If there was anything that were to happen, they would respond even internally or externally in the country, that kind of thing. They were not prepared for World War II, and they weren't prepared for the fact that Russia began to pour in millions of troops everywhere that they were fighting, and that's what Russia can do because it's such a huge country. Well, Finland are basically a bunch of guys on skis, all dressed in white, and they adopt something that was central in a tradition to them, and it's called sisu. S-I-S-U, sisu. And the English equivalent to the word is tenacity, or the ability to change no matter what happens to you at all. The ability to do whatever is needed and to use your location to your advantage. And it sounds great on paper, right? You're thinking, oh, it sounds great, but Russia had a lot more people, a lot more firepower, and just a lot more ways of getting things done. And they did. They just came pouring into Finland, and Finland immediately goes to the United States for help and says, hey, we don't know what's happening. We can't do anything about this. Can you help us? And the United States basically says, we're kind of tied up at the moment. We can't help you. Talk to Britain. And they didn't call Britain because they knew Britain was already tied up too. So they kind of went, well, then we're on our own here, and adopted that tactic known as sisu. So what is sisu in wartime? Well, sisu meant basically we're never going to meet the enemy head on. What we're going to do is we're going to annoy the enemy to death. And that's what they would do. They adopted a culture of stealing from the Russians. They would actually hide out battalions, which a battalion in the Finnish army was about 13 people. They would hide out in the hills, all dressed in white, until all the Russians went to sleep. And the Russians would all camp right in the same place, usually in a valley. They were not used to using the location and the terrain of Finland. Finland is very mountainous. And so here come the little Finnish soldiers, kind of just walking into camp and everything like that. They steal all the Russian supplies. All the food, all the ammunition, winter clothing, everything they could find or carry. One time, one of them stole a tank apparently without waking up the Russians, which is actually really unbelievable, but I guess that happened. Yeah, so they would just start stealing from them. And imagine you're a Russian soldier and you wake up and you look around and you're like, where's all our stuff? And it would demoralize, like whole infantries would be demoralized by these Finnish soldiers. Not only that, but the Finnish had a system of how they would attack the Russians. They would actually do that until the Russians were so stinking hungry that the Russians, anyone that had food, they would jump on it. And there's a famous battle called the Russian soup battle, in which the Russians all converge in one camp because everybody got all their food stolen by the Finnish. And they get into this one camp, and thousands of them are camped out there. And someone decides to make big pots of soup because we got to feed all these guys. And someone took all their food. So all the Russians show up. The Finnish, meanwhile, are encircling the entire thing, just ready. Right? The Russians come in, and they all go to get their soup. And these Russians are so hungry that all of them drop everything they're carrying. And in wartime, the main thing you're carrying is something to defend yourself with, right? They drop those two. And they go kind of into the middle of camp, and they all decide to devour soup. Well, the Finnish sneak in, and they steal every last gun and every last round of ammunition. And so the Russians finally, all the Finnish, I guess, at once stood up. They just stood up out of the snow. And the Russians, probably with like soup spoons to their mouths, looked up and saw just Finns everywhere, pointing rifles at them. And they go to grab things to defend themselves, but cannot find a single thing to defend them. Even some Finnish troops have actually taken rifles and taken rounds out of the chamber and out of the rifle, like unloaded clips, and just left the rifle there. And so some Russians are like, I got one! And pick it up and there's nothing in it, And the Finnish are just, I guess, smiling. It caused the surrender of a lot of men that day because the Russians just went, well, and it was such an embarrassment. But sisu, it just meant we're well, we understand that the odds are stacked against us, but what we're going to do is we're going to annoy the enemy until they can't stand us anymore. And that's what they did. And it was essential to what was called the Finnish Winter War. The other thing that they would do is the Finnish were very good at surviving in temperatures that other troops were not able to survive in. Like the Russians would famously refer to Finland as, you've heard of Siberia? Well, Finland makes Siberia look like a desert. It's super cold in Finland. And there's so many stories, if you want to dive into the history, there's so many stories there, but sisu was the way that the Finnish were able to annoy the Russians and keep them kind of locked down in their country. So my question today is, what is spiritual sisu? Because, Carrie Ann told me this before I got up here. I make a lot of war metaphors, I guess, and I'm sorry about that. I kind of do that, I think, because I kind of view our faith as a battle, an ever-changing, but always kind of the same battle against an enemy that just finds different ways to annoy us. And so what if we had this version of sisu? Well, Proverbs 2 talks about sisu. My son, verse 1, my son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as silver. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not reading off the ESV, I'm reading off of my NIV, so I'm sorry, I'm reading something different than what you're seeing here. And search for it like hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the path of justice and watching over the ways of his saints. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Now, it doesn't say, I like how at the beginning, it doesn't actually say that God's just going to give you these things. I like that a lot, because God's, the relationship he has with us is like a father to his children. And, if you are trying to teach a child to do anything, you have to have them display mastery of whatever they're doing until you can give them the next step, right? It's just the way that you teach people. And so, at the beginning, it doesn't say, God's just going to give you these things. It's all good, man. It actually says, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out, not just if you ask, right? If you call out for insight and raise your voice. It's as if the author kind of wants us to know that this person is shouting, right? If you call out and raise your voice, then that's when I'm going to give you this wisdom. And what is my wisdom going to do? Well, it's going to come into your heart. Last sentence there. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. If you want a ground zero for your faith, then you need to understand the giver of the ground zero for your faith. If you want your faith built and have a better foundation, you need to get acquainted with the builder and ask him to come do these things. In fact, you need to shout at him, give me this wisdom. Do you do that? I don't. Until I read this. Then I began doing this. Now, I kind of asked myself, how am I going to do this? How is someone who, I have a faith background, but I don't have certain things I do that plant me firmly in my faith, or plant my family firmly in their faith. And so how do I find things to fall back on? How do I know if I'm doing this? Well, my first point is, do you and your family have a culture of faith? How do you practice your culture of faith? In fact, the only way, if you're a leader of your family, the only way you can truly be a leader and implant this in your family is if you personally have a culture of faith. And then if you say you do, what's it look like? Here's what mine looks like. I've currently established a place and time of worship and study. And I think I've harped on this or talked about this the most. Because it's been so essential to me. I didn't used to have this. You need to understand, I used to kind of view my relationship with God as the plan on the app, If you go to the Bible app, and I don't discourage going to the Bible app, it's a great starting place, but if you go to the Bible app, you will find a lot of you'll find a lot of motivational studies. And basically they're all, God is my best friend and my huggy bear and is going to save me from everything, yada yada. And there's 5 days, so you don't have to go all 7 days in the week. You can take a day off if you want. You can only go 2 days. I found a 2-day study one time, seriously. And all you have to do is you have to pop open the app, you hit view the motivational thing for the day, and one of them literally started with the sentence, "Did you know God loves you and wants to make you happy?" That was on the Bible app. And it kind of alarmed me when I saw that, because I went, ooh, I don't know. I don't know if that's the entire story. It kind of involves a relationship is 2 ways. God's just not going to come in and implant happiness and security in your life unless you show that you are willing to work for it. Because God only gives that to you because He needs you to help others. He needs you to understand that you need to help others find the joy that you have found. And if you're not someone that's going to do that, it says, every branch that did not bear fruit was cut off and thrown into the fire. He's not going to waste time on a branch that's just hanging out there waiting for fruit. But I go on here to Proverbs 2, verse 11. Discretion will watch over you. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen if this faith-based reality is embraced within you and your family. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil. From men of perverted speech, who forsake the path of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness. Who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil. Men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. So basically, if you implant this culture of sisu into your life, God will give you one of the greatest bits of wisdom that there is in Proverbs. Discretion. Discretion will watch over you. What does that mean? Actually, I experienced this in the past week. So, in the past week we had conferences. And conferences are a great time to, first of all, meet families, talk to some kids about, study skills and things like that, help people firmly implant those in their lives and stuff, and make academic culture a part of their family. But also, it's a great time to actually talk together and meet together as teams of teachers. And I'll bet you didn't know that, but there's a lot of time in conferences when we're not actually doing conferences. And so what we do is we get caught up on everything that's been put off. I had this list that was, like 25 things, and each of those 25 things was like, grade all of these essays was one of the 25, which took, 2 or 3 hours to do. And one of those things was to meet with my 6th grade team and kind of unify with some things. So we got together and we unified with some practices and stuff. And I have this friend that I've kind of been cultivating a relationship with throughout my time working with this team. We've become very good friends at this point. And this friend has kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with God. And he will actually say that. His culture is not one of someone who has sisu in their life and with God. And because of that, there are some things that have popped up that have been heavy areas of conversation. But the funny thing is, now, this person is much older than me, but he keeps coming into my room to talk about these things. And I've done likewise. I've shared struggles of mine, and I've basically shared life with this individual. And through that, all of a sudden, I didn't know where this was going, by the way, we began to have a very heavy faith-based conversation. It kind of went like this. We were talking about something else, about families and things like that, and I began to talk about some people in my family that have passed away and what I remember from them and that kind of stuff. And he said, you know what, you ever get the sense that, you don't know where you're going? And I went, what do you mean? And so I asked for clarification, and he said, do you ever get the sense that there's a legacy that you leave behind on earth, and yeah, I guess that's important and stuff, but that's not really you? You ever get a sense that you don't know where you're going when you die? And I kind of looked up, I think my eyes did that same thing, but I kind of tried to keep it in check, like, oh, this is it, I was waiting for this time. I was waiting for this exact moment, and immediately, the training that I've done and the praying about this individual that I have done with God fell right into place. all of a sudden, because I was able to, because I have this this newfound faith-based practice of, this is when I talk to God, this is the study that I'm doing, this is how I pray to my God, this is the time every day when I do these things, and he's been leading me to pray about this individual. All of a sudden now was the time he needed me. You never know when you're going to be deployed, but you just know it's happening. It's going to happen. God is going to use the things that he is teaching you and the prayers that you are praying about someone. You never know when that's going to happen. It just shows up. And all of a sudden, I knew this was it. This was the time. I needed to handle this appropriately. And so, this individual was kind of sitting there, and I went, well, I immediately decided to relate to him, and I said, I've thought about that a lot myself. I have thought a lot in the past about, my faith. My faith does teach me where I'm going when I leave this earth. And, I've had thoughts of, did I make the right choice? What's my faith been all about? That kind of thing. But you know what? God has always answered those questions with me. And I have no doubt of where I'm going when I leave this earth. I have no doubt. In fact, I have absolutely no doubt. So much that I want you to be where I am. And before I knew what was happening, this uncomfortable thing was out of my mouth. I want you to be where I am when we both go. I don't want to lose you. That's how much I care about you. And he sat there for an uncomfortable time. An uncomfortable 10 seconds probably ticked off the clock when he just stood there because I had unloaded with him. Not only the fact, I didn't come at it as an evangelist, right? I didn't come at it, well, if you say these words, and I didn't go that way. I said, I care about you so much that no matter how uncomfortable this is, I'm willing to lose our friendship, but I'm not willing to have you end up in a place of torment someday. And I think that means something. Whenever you go to share your faith, there's always this opportunity, right? When you sit there and you go, is this going to be awkward, and am I going to lose a friendship over this? Well, in my mind, all of a sudden the answer was clear. I've never had an answer for that. Whenever someone has come to me and asked me that, and whenever I've thought about that myself, I've never had an answer to what if this individual decides to quit my friendship, never talk to me again, or worse, tell other people that Geoff is this Bible-thumping guy, right? What happens then? And I actually had a response for myself. The response was just what I told you. I cared more about this individual in the moment and wanted to convey to him, I care about you so much, I'm willing to lose you. I care about you so much, I'm willing to lose our friendship. I'm willing for you to hate me. I'm willing for you to never talk to me again as long as I get out the fact that you and I need to be together in paradise. Now that is something. And I think that got through. He tried to joke it off. He actually said, well, then I guess I better convert to your religion, huh? But I could tell it meant something. And that's what this will do. Having spiritual sisu will give you discretion. And it says discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of righteousness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. If I were to walk with those men, he would have never had that conversation with me. I could say, he probably would have even been my friend still, but he would have never come to me as a spiritual advisor in that moment. Walking in the way of God and having spiritual sisu, having a path that you know you're going down, a way that you worship, a way that you pray, a way that you study Scripture, makes you powerful in the eyes of the enemy. And it makes you an annoyance to the enemy, because the enemy cannot shake you. No matter what the enemy throws at you, you've got a backbone. You have a way to deliver yourself from the enemy. And it annoys the enemy to no end. So much that he's been changing his tactics from day one, but they all look the same, right? He's been changing his tactics from day one, but we all know what they look like. That's what Sisu will do for you. So what do you do this week with this? I recommend always taking something home, but I also recommend today that you pray on this, that you simply ask for discernment. It said that wisdom, it said in the Bible that wisdom, if you ask for it, God will not forsake the giving of wisdom to the person that asks for it. And obviously that happened for Solomon because we have an entire book of Proverbs that came out of this man. So I would pray today and I would ask for wisdom. And I would ask God, where are we? Is our relationship something that is a personal relationship? Or is it a family relationship? And if it's a family relationship, what are the things in my family that I do? And maybe we start a tradition. Maybe we do one thing. I don't know what that thing would be. I can't make that call for you. But maybe we do one thing. And if you need to do one thing personally in your spiritual life, establish a prayer time and a study time that makes you feel slightly uncomfortable. That's not just a 2-day fix or a 5 days of strength or 6 days of love, but that it's a bigger study, it's a bigger deal to you. Let's pray. God, would you guard our hearts? Would you guard our hearts from the ways of evil, from the ways of the enemy? And God, would you even do one better for us and give us a cultural sisu within ourselves, that we know who we are as a faith-based culture. Whenever the devil tries to change up his tactics, we're one step